40 years of the Business Journal is sponsored by Compco and these participating sponsors.
Well, when I came to Youngstown in 1991, it was to become the leader of an organization that was called the Regional Growth Alliance. And it was a small economic development shop housed at the Youngstown Area Chamber of Commerce. The RGA looked to work on a regional basis throughout Trumbull and Mahoning counties. It, like most of the economic development organizations at the time, was very small, one professional, one assistant. But that's what I came to do. After about 2 years, the Youngstown Area Chamber, Niles Area Chamber, Warren Area Chamber agreed to merge and create what we then knew as, or now know as, the Youngstown Warren Regional Chamber. And I became the head of the Economic and Community Development Program for that organization.
Now, you started here in 91. How long were you here until?
So 2008. I think March of 2008, I left to come to Memphis.
Now, how did you first become acquainted with our area?
Actually, I first became acquainted with the area as a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon School of Urban and Public Affairs. We were required to do what was called a project course, our second semester, first year, and became involved in a project that looked at revitalizing steel mill towns in the Pittsburgh area. And as a result, working on that, became aware of what was going on in Youngstown. And so it's in the summer between the 2 years of the program, having done an internship in New York City, when I got back to Pittsburgh a little bit before classes started, took a road trip to Youngstown. Spent, I think, basically 2 days there, crawled around the then vacant Jenny Furnace, and saw other sites. And that was my first first person introduction to Youngstown. Years
What
later,
year was that?
that would have been, well, let's see, I was in graduate school from, I believe, 82 to 84. So it would have been the summer of 1983. And then fast forward several years, I had been awarded a presidential management internship, had gone to Washington as a PMI, worked in the Department of Energy, Department of Housing and Urban Development, stayed with the Department of Housing and Urban Development for a little bit, but always had in the back of my mind I wanted to get into local economic development, and thought it ought to be in a place like Youngstown, where the effort, if successful, would have a real impact on people's lives. And I remember late one year during the holiday season, seeing a job listing for the job at the Regional Growth Alliance in one of the economic development trade publications. And even though I had missed the deadline, applied anyway, and ultimately got the job at the RGA.
What was your first impression of the area when you looked at it as a grad student?
Depressed and depressing. I mean, the parts of the community that I saw were really the hard hit parts of the community. So as I say, having crawled around the Jenny blast furnace and actually having been sort of run out of the Jenny blast furnace by a pack of stray dogs, and just the area around there. I forget where we stayed. I think out on the highway, so probably Austintown, but most of the time was spent either downtown or in the older areas of the city, and it was a depressing place back then.
How did your impression change when you came back here to work?
Well, my impression was changed by really two different things. One is the progress the community had made in the intervening years, but also the fact that I saw more of the community. Again, when I was there as a grad student, excuse me, it was as the proverbial blind man in the elephant. I only touched a few parts of the community. So there were certainly places, even when I was there as a grad student, that were were more vibrant and successful and hopeful. Just did not see them. This was, remember, uh, largely pre pre-internet, pre-wandering around with a computer in your phone, and I was pretty much winging it. So when I came back in 1991, I saw obviously the entire community, the shall we say the good and the less good, but the community had also made some progress. It was on the way back. Things had bottomed out, and there were some successful efforts to begin to rebuild the community.
What signs of progress did you see? What particular things could you point to?
Well, I mean, you had the sort of about the ring outside of the urban core, which, while certainly significantly impacted by the shutdown of the mills and everything that transpired from that, still maintained a level of vibrancy that you know one could build on. Uh, there were some nascent signs of life in downtown Youngstown. There were the city of Youngstown under then Mayor Patrick Ongaro had just begun their program of acquiring brownfield sites, particularly former steel mill sites, remediating those sites, prepping them for development, and then giving them away to businesses that would significantly bring significant number of employment opportunities to the city, and therefore through the income tax, essentially make that process profitable, which was a very aggressive, very bold move on the city's part. Uh, so yeah, things were certainly moving in the right direction in 1991.
What were the main challenges you encountered back then in pursuing economic development?
Well, the initial challenge was an organizational one, really, with the exception of what was then called the Mahoning Valley Economic Development Corp, MVEDC. All the local economic development organizations, be they chamber-based or otherwise, were small and under-resourced, and so we had an organizational issue of not having necessarily the capacity to do what we all wanted and needed to do. You had the historic split between the Youngstown centric part of the Mahoning Valley and the Trump and the Warren centric part of the Mahoning Valley, which didn't make things any easier. Actually made things harder than they needed to be and needed to be overcome, so that again we could all be rowing in the same direction and working together. Uh, we had macroeconomic issues that we needed to overcome, in terms of where industry was locating, what they were looking for, how best to revitalize our major downtown cores, particularly downtown Youngstown. So, I mean, there were many challenges at the time.
How much progress, or if you characterize the progress the area had made by the time you left in 2008?
Oh, I think by the time that I left in 2008, uh, I think the seeds had really been sown for moving the valley ahead. Um,
A
we,
particular
we were,
seeds.
I'm sorry.
A particular seeds.
Yes. So organizationally, we were much better organized. So the chambers had merged in, I think, approximately 1993,
Yeah.
and that had created on the on the private sector side an organization that had enough heft to be effective. We saw growth, with some of the public sector entities, both for the city of Memphis and in Warren as well, and just organizationally, we had more ability. Um, there was a growing sense that we were one valley. It wasn't perfect in 2008 by the time I left, but it was substantially better than it was in 1991. And I think that point, by the time I left, certainly the majority of the leadership maybe the overwhelming majority of the leadership understood that what was good for one was good for all, and that we needed to take the resources we had and use them most effectively. Downtown Youngstown was going through a renaissance, something that we participated in, I think, significantly. But vacant buildings had been either torn down or reoccupied. Not all of them, but a goodly number of them, and that area was certainly, and it's continued to grow, but certainly I think this was well on its way at that point. Industrial, we had carved out a niche for ourselves as a community in terms of industrial recruitment. The city's program that I had mentioned earlier had continued to bear fruit, and I think the narrative nationally had switched from Youngstown as being this, depressed, tragic Rust Belt saga, had morphed into Youngstown as this sort of survivor of deindustrialization and a model for what communities could do to rebuild themselves after catastrophic loss.
At that point, Youngstown, the Youngstown Business Incubator, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think you were on its board for a good amount of time, had started its shift toward software
Right.
rather than being a more general purpose incubator. And that obviously would lead in a couple of years after you left to the growth, the additive manufacturing taking hold here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had, I did not serve on the board.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No. Did help write the EDA grant that helped make the transition. Jim Kostler, of course, was the first CEO of YBI, and I had worked with Jim at the the Youngstown Warren Regional Chamber,
Right.
and then of course Barb Ewing had worked with us at the Youngstown Warren Regional Chamber, and at one point, and I don't remember the year, the Youngstown Central Area Community Improvement Corporation, YCACIC, had contracted with the regional chamber for staffing purposes, which was our entry into
Right.
downtown redevelopment. And now, of course, led to the Voinovich Center and the CSB building and the court building. Well, it also led to two buildings being constructed for YBI. So we constructed the Taft Center,
Right.
and then we're working on the Semple building actually when I left.
Right.
So yeah, YBI this had a critical impact on the trajectory of the city and continues to do so, and we were pleased to be able to assist that in some small ways.
What disappointments did you have? Where didn't things go as you had hoped? In particular projects or initiatives that you can share?
Well, at some level, economic development is an infinitely frustrating activity because dreams are high, and in most communities, particularly those communities where you are really making things happen, or as opposed to things are happening and you just happen to be there. But in those communities where it's really incumbent upon the locals to manufacture growth, no pun intended, you always have dreams that are much larger than your ability to deliver. So while we had significant successes on the industrial front, there was certainly more that we wanted to do. We had for many years great hopes and aspirations of using or leveraging the Youngstown Warren Regional Airport as a cargo hub, as an aerotropolis, and obviously that did not come to pass for a variety of reasons. And even in downtown Youngstown, and downtown Warren, where we were very active, you know, projects are difficult. The court project was extremely difficult. Other projects that we had hoped to do At the time, the Crest Building project never came to pass during my time there. So even in success, we love to talk about our successes and tout our successes, but people should know that for every success you talk about, there are two or three projects you wish you could have done or thought you could do, but just never got it to go.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about what do you see as the big wins during
The
your
big,
tenure?
the big wins. Well, I'll start with something we haven't talked about. So, Grow Mahoning Valley, which was a partnership of business and labor and government to help expand public funding, public meaning state and federal funding for local infrastructure projects. The group came together, was modeled on what had been done in Cleveland. It was centered at the chamber, and we were able to convince, again, not only business leaders, which was relatively simple for us, but labor union leaders and government officials to all work together, and that meant ranking infrastructure projects. We would solicit proposals from all the government jurisdictions. They would be ranked, and then we would pitch the highest ranked in each category, for the applicable state and federal programs. And during the time that I was there, we counted $195 million of federal and state grants for roads and water lines and sewer projects. It's not sexy by any stretch of the imagination, but it is incredibly important for growth. And so, an example of us coming together. Another one that we haven't talked about was our effort, the Chamber's effort in particular, to lead a coalition throughout the community to keep General Motors in our community at a time when the plant was threatened. Now, obviously, that has changed in the ensuing years, but at the time was critically important to keep that plant, as well as to preserve the Air Force Reserve Base in the face of base realignment and closure. So, two
Right.
campaigns that we ran. Which then reminds me, so let me go back to a prior question if I can diverge for a
Yeah.
second. I'll come back to this, but you asked about frustration. So at one point, we led a campaign, an unsuccessful campaign, to uh, uh, increase taxes slightly in Trumbull and Mahoning counties to fund a development program through the Western Reserve Port Authority so that there would be a two-county entity, public entity, which is the Port Authority is, which would have the financial resources to develop the sites not only around the airport, but to contribute to development throughout the two-county area. Ultimately, though we initially secured the support of then Congressman Jim Traficant, he ultimately came out opposed to the project, and we lost 40 to 60 essentially across the two-county area,
Yeah.
which was sort of a bitter loss from our perspective. Okay, back to the success stories. Downtown Youngstown, and the work we did there is something that I'll always be proud of. The you know Getting the Voinovich Center done was as much luck and magic as it was great planning and execution. Each of the projects was certainly much more difficult behind the scenes than we ever wanted anyone to know. But sort of brick by brick, building by building, we helped launch the revitalization of or enhance the revitalization of downtown Youngstown. In Warren, we purchased three buildings, three adjacent small office buildings. We being obviously the chamber, located our Trumbull County office there, located all our economic development staff there, to help increase the vitality on the square. We developed a 93-acre industrial park by the airport. It never turned into the aerotropolis we had anticipated, but it did help attract significant, industrial tenants to the community. In general, as I look back, I think we tallied 350 business development projects during my time with the chamber. accounted for about 15,000 new and retained jobs and about 1.3 billion of capital investment.
Now, how much have you kept up with what's been happening around here since in the years since you left?
A fair amount. So I still scan the headlines on an almost daily basis. Still have very good friends in the community, and we talk. Some of us weekly. Have been back from time to time. Most recently, the summer of 2022, we were in the community in the valley for a few days, seeing friends and driving around sightseeing. So do try to keep in touch.
What do you make of what's your impression of what you've seen develop in the years since you've left? Have things advanced to the degree that you would have hoped or expected?
Well, it's like I mentioned earlier, it never matches expectations. Our hopes for the community, for places we love, are always greater than what is realistic or achievable, and that's a good thing. But I certainly am encouraged by what's going on. We used to joke that with climate change, which obviously was not as well understood back then as it is now, but with even then, with what we understood about climate change, that if nothing else, the valley would be in great shape because it had land, it had water, and it was never going to flood. Well, true on all counts, but the community has much more going for it than that. And while progress is never the pure linear function that you would want, it's never uninterrupted. It's never an uninterrupted upward arrow. Still, there are so many great things that are going on in the community that will continue to pay benefits, and the community will continue to make progress. And so, yeah, we're just very encouraged.
Anything in particular that surprised you? Any development around here that thought, gee, I never would have expected that to happen.
Well, the one that you actually referenced one earlier, so I think we need to go back and congratulate YBI. So there's the whole additive manufacturing piece. So that postdates me. So that was
Right.
not here when I was here. And had you asked if we were if the valley, if Youngstown was likely to become a center for additive manufacturing, a national center for additive manufacturing, it would have seemed a little far-fetched at the time. But obviously that has come to pass to the credit of everyone at YBI, but particularly Barb Ewing. And I think that's a great thing for the community, not necessarily because it throws off thousands and thousands of jobs, because it won't locally, but because it's one of those, what we used to call smart things. It's one of those things that attracts smart people to the community. It's the kind of thing that engages our smart people. And I say smart people because certainly I don't understand how it all works and wouldn't even pretend to. But it connects the valley, connects Youngstown with others around the world who are similarly engaged. And that is all to the good. That brings other kinds of benefits to the community that you couldn't even anticipate. So that's one of the things that's a real surprise. The continued growth of Youngstown State University, recognizing that again, these are never purely linear. It's never totally an upward moving arrow. There's always progress and then issues, and progress and then issues. But in general, I think the university has continued to make great strides. We certainly hope Eastern Gateway is able to resolve its problems, because education is key. The Trumbull campus of Kent State University, I mean, these are assets that help uplift everyone. So, the progress that's been made there. Eastern Gateway wasn't there when I was there, and again, I understand where they are as we speak today, and we're hoping for the best. But something happens there that just needs to be, something else needs to come in to fill that void. I mean, it's important, and if at first you don't succeed, you keep trying until you do get it right.
What do you foresee for the valley? What kind of future?
I think the valley is going to continue to make progress. I don't think it will be explosive progress, at least for the near term. But I do think it is going to be progress. I think you know, quality of life, the economic opportunities that exist, great location between Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Akron and Canton and with access to the Great Lakes. I think all of those will continue to serve the Youngstown area well, and I quite frankly think it will continue to grow. And if at some point in the future climate issues really do begin to impinge on the coastal areas, Youngst- Youngstown will never flood. It has plenty of potable water and lots of land for development. So it could be a lifeboat for the country.
"40 Years of the Business Journal" is sponsored by Comco and these participating sponsors.